If you looked closely at the general standing behind the president this morning, you didn't see ease, you saw calculation, the kind of stillness that settles in when something irreversible is about to be said. Because what unfolded today was not a routine trade spat, or another headline about tariffs and timber. It was not about milk quotas, it was not even truly about Arctic budgets. It was about something older and heavier than policy. And in that instant, the weight of it shifted. The President of the United States stood before cameras and publicly dismissed a country that has fought beside America for more than a century. Not quietly, not in a closed-door meeting, but in full view of the world. If this had been about revising a treaty, analysts could have slotted it into the usual cycles of political friction. Nations argue, leaders posture. That's the choreography of geopolitics. And once rhetoric becomes personal, it stops being procedural. It becomes emotional. And emotion, once ignited, doesn't respond to fine print. During remarks that quickly began vanishing from certain feeds, the president didn't limit himself to economic criticism. He referenced Canada's war losses, 457 fallen service members who fought in Afghanistan, and framed their sacrifice as negligible. A bad weekend, he implied. A dismissive comparison. A smirk where solemnity might have stood. And in Ottawa, something changed. There was no immediate shouting. No fiery televised rebuttal. The Canadian Prime Minister walked to a podium, adjusted the microphone, and read a single name of one fallen soldier. Just one. The silence that followed was more powerful than outrage. It was the kind of silence that signals rupture. Let's rewind to how this began. A reporter asked about stalled Arctic defense negotiations. Normally, Arctic security briefings are dry. Icebreakers, radar installations, supply chains in sub-zero climates. But earlier that morning, advisors reportedly emphasized a point the president dislikes hearing. The northern defense perimeter depends heavily on Canadian cooperation. Geography is stubborn. Any potential missile trajectory over North America crosses the Arctic first. That means Canadian airspace, Canadian radar stations, Canadian listening posts forming part of the North Warning System and integrated operations under NORAD. When the president declared Canada a security risk and announced suspension of top-level intelligence access, it wasn't symbolic. It meant severing integrated defense protocols that have operated for decades. Tier 1 intelligence access is not ceremonial. It determines who sits in command rooms when alerts flash across radar screens. When you remove a partner from that room, you alter real-time defense coordination. The moment intensified when the reporter pressed him. She mentioned Canada invoking NATO's Article 5 after September 11th. She cited the 158 Canadians killed in Afghanistan. She asked if that sacrifice mattered. The response, dismissive laughter, became the flashpoint. Within hours, images of Canadian soldiers in Kandahar, coffins draped in flags along the Highway of Heroes, and joint patrol photos circulated widely. Not as arguments, as reminders. Inside Washington, phones reportedly began ringing. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, analysts weren't debating sentiment. They were reviewing operational consequences. A circulating internal memo reportedly flagged potential northern sector vulnerabilities should coordination falter. Estimates suggested that early warning detection efficiency could decline significantly if access to certain Arctic installations were restricted. In nuclear defense, minutes matter. While cable panels argued over tone and politics, Canadian leadership made a quieter move. The Prime Minister visited the National War Memorial. No mention of the President. No direct counterattack. Instead, he spoke of shared sacrifice and mutual responsibility. Then came an announcement, a comprehensive national security review of energy exports to the United States. It was framed in language Washington itself often uses, ensuring national resources do not inadvertently support hostile conduct. Canada is deeply integrated into American energy infrastructure. Hydroelectric power from Quebec lights parts of New York and New England. Heavy crude from Alberta feeds refineries designed specifically for that blend. Supply chains are engineered around predictability. No valves were shut. No dramatic embargo declared. But enhanced inspections, environmental reviews, and compliance audits were initiated. Markets reacted swiftly. Regional energy prices fluctuated. Traders began pricing uncertainty. There's a distinction between volume and leverage. One dominates headlines, the other shapes balance sheets. Veterans across both countries began speaking out. Many emphasized shared operations in Afghanistan, joint patrols in Kandahar and Helmand, coordinated extractions, overlapping command structures. For those who served, alliances are not abstract frameworks. They are lived experiences forged under fire. Reports also indicated diplomatic backchannels activating. Defense officials from both countries attempted to clarify procedural ambiguities, because military institutions rely on predictability. Uncertainty complicates planning. International observers took notice. Russian bomber flights near the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone were reported shortly after the dispute escalated. Flights that typically prompt coordinated U.S.-Canadian responses. This time, authorization processes appeared less streamlined. China issued a carefully worded statement expressing openness to expanded cooperation with Canada on resource stability. Not aggressive, not provocative, just strategic. When alliances strain, competitors explore. The economic dimension is equally significant. Automotive manufacturing in the Midwest relies on parts crossing the U.S.-Canada border multiple times before final assembly. Even minor inspection delays can disrupt synchronized production lines. Agricultural exports flow north in large volumes. Any retaliatory tariffs or regulatory slowdowns would affect rural economies quickly. Inflation remains sensitive. Lumber, aluminum, and energy cost increases ripple into housing and construction. Investors, wary of unpredictability, adjust risk premiums accordingly. Where does this go? One scenario is recalibration. Diplomatic language softens. Intelligence access is quietly restored. Energy reviews conclude without escalation. Markets stabilize. Public rhetoric cools. Another path is entrenchment. Political pride hardens. Trade friction intensifies. Border procedures tighten. Economic slowdown follows. The third possibility is gradual decoupling. Not a dramatic break, but incremental diversification. Canada expands European and Pacific partnerships. Defense arrangements evolve. Cooperation becomes conditional rather than automatic. History shows alliances rarely collapse overnight. They thin. First hesitation, then diversification, then distance. The United States and Canada have long shared what is often called the world's quietest border, not because it is unguarded, but because it is governed by trust. It is built in trenches and briefing rooms, in intelligence exchanges and joint patrols. But it is also fragile. Markets will respond over the coming days. Diplomats will test channels. Advisors will measure polling against security assessments. There remains space for recalibration. There always is. But words matter. When sacrifice is framed as transactional, it reverberates beyond one news cycle. Other allies observe. NATO capitals listen. Asian partners calculate. The question becomes less about one bilateral dispute and more about reliability. Mark Carney's approach, measured, procedural, economically targeted, suggests a strategy grounded in leverage rather than volume. The wager appears to be that structural pressure influences policy faster than outrage. At the institutional level, military culture emphasizes honor and continuity. When alliance commitments appear politicized, it introduces moral tension within disciplined systems. Meanwhile, adversaries test boundaries subtly, through presence flights, diplomatic invitations, resource negotiations. The next 72 hours will be telling. Energy markets will open. Supply chain managers will evaluate contingencies. Defense officials will assess readiness gaps. Political advisors will weigh optics against consequences. Alliances endure disagreements. They falter under contempt. 457 names have resurfaced, not as statistics, but as symbols of shared history. The question now is whether this moment becomes a rupture or a reckoning, whether recalibration restores equilibrium, or whether gradual erosion begins. Because alliances are not sustained by geography alone. They are sustained by memory, respect, and the understanding that when one partner bleeds, the other remembers. What happens next will reveal whether that understanding still holds.